Aquarius. There are moments when everything still looks the same space, the same familiar faces, and yet something inside you is no longer as still as it used to be. A passing glance, a moment slightly out of rhythm, an unexpected presence you didn't see coming. And then you begin to notice what makes you pause isn't the situation itself, but the way it touches something very real inside you. No one says anything out loud, nothing is clearly explained. And yet, something feels seen, not fully clear, not something you can quite name, but enough to make you wonder, are these feelings still resting quietly where they used to be kept? And if lately you've experienced a moment like this, then maybe this story will reach you in a way that feels quietly your own. Then there are moments in life that arrive without any warning, no preparation, no signal from the outside world, just a very ordinary moment. So ordinary that if you're not fully present, you might miss it entirely. And yet, you're right there, in a familiar space, maybe in the middle of a quiet conversation, or just a passing glance between people who once felt so known. Everything seems to be moving the same way, the same rhythm, the same sense of ease you once believed you understood so well. And then, something subtle touches the moment. Not big enough to become an event, not clear enough to name right away, but deep enough that you can't pretend you didn't feel it. It's like the surface of a still lake, perfectly calm, and in one small corner, a ripple catches the light. You don't know exactly what changed. You only know the way you feel about that moment is no longer the same. Maybe it's the way someone paused just a second longer. Maybe it's a look that no longer feels completely neutral. Or maybe it's simply the presence of someone that shifts everything in a way that's hard to explain. And in those tiny details, something begins to reveal itself. Not in a loud or dramatic way, but in a way that feels real, close to the raw, human layer of emotion, where the need to stay in control starts to soften. You may not understand what it means right away, and you don't have to, because some moments in life are not meant to be analyzed. They're meant to be felt, to help you notice that beneath what feels familiar, there are always deeper currents. Feelings that were never fully named, thoughts that were never spoken out loud. And when a moment like this appears, it often carries a very quiet message. That maybe you're standing in front of something more real than what you once believed was stable. Not to confuse you, not to break anything apart, but simply to invite you to look again, with a deeper kind of presence. And if you allow yourself to stay with that feeling just a little longer, without pushing it away, without rushing to explain it, you may begin to realize that this seemingly small moment is where something quietly true is starting to unfold. There are moments when someone steps into the scene and everything shifts in a way that's hard to explain. Not because they do anything extraordinary, not because they're trying to interrupt something, just their presence, arriving at the right moment and in the right space, somehow brings to the surface what had quietly been there all along. You might notice it in a very brief instant, a slight hesitation, a look that no longer holds the same familiar balance, or a feeling subtle, unfamiliar, that even you can't fully explain right away. And then slowly you begin to realize there are things that have existed for a while, but were never seen this clearly before. In this case, a third person doesn't necessarily mean a problem. They're not there to break anything, not there to take or replace what already exists. Sometimes, they're simply a mirror, appearing at just the right time, reflecting deeper layers of emotion that even the people involved may have never truly faced. A mirror that says nothing, that doesn't judge, and yet makes everything harder to hide. It's because when there's another perspective, another presence, what was once kept quiet in silence begins to surface, even if only through the smallest signs. And no, this doesn't always feel comfortable. It can bring a sense of awkwardness, a quiet unease that doesn't seem to have a clear source. Because deep down, when something is brought into the light, it also means you're no longer fully in the same safe space as before. But if you look at it from a different angle, maybe that moment isn't here to make things difficult. Maybe it's here to help you see more clearly, what you feel, what you once believed was fine. what you've never truly questioned until now. And maybe what matters most isn't about who's right, who's wrong, or what will happen next. Maybe it's simply this. You're starting to notice something real, and a very quiet question, but one that may stay with you for a long time. Is this feeling still something you want to keep hidden, or is it slowly becoming a part of your truth that you can no longer pretend not to see? You don't have to answer right away. You don't have to rush into any decision. Just allow yourself to acknowledge this. Something has been reflected back to you, and sometimes just seeing more clearly is already a powerful shift. And then, after you begin to sense that something is being reflected back to you, another layer starts to open, gently, almost quietly, but enough that you can't return to feeling things the way you used to. There were emotions you once held so carefully, placed in the right space, kept within a structure that felt reasonable, that felt safe. You knew when to stay silent, and when to keep your distance, when to let things pass as if they didn't carry much weight at all. And for a long time, that worked. Nothing was disrupted, nothing slipped out of control. Everything moved along a familiar script, predictable, contained. But then, a moment comes, a very small one, and suddenly everything you arranged so neatly no longer fits the same way. You weren't prepared for it. There was no time to adjust your emotions like before. It just happens. A look that lingers a second longer, a silence that no longer feels ordinary, or the way someone, maybe you, maybe someone else, becomes quietly, genuinely unsteady. No one says anything directly, and yet, you know, something has shifted, not in the situation itself, but in the way you feel it. The emotions that once stayed still no longer sit exactly where they used to. They don't explode. They don't rush out all at once. But it's enough for you to notice. They're moving. And once emotions begin to move, the old script no longer holds the same power. You might try to return to familiar reactions, to keep everything as it was, to tell yourself, nothing's really changed. But somewhere deep inside, a part of you already knows, that's not entirely true anymore. This doesn't mean anyone did something wrong. Nothing was broken. It's just that truth, in its own quiet way, has begun to rise to the surface. And when truth reaches the surface, it doesn't need to be loud. It only needs to be close enough, real enough, that you can't keep seeing things the same way without beginning to question. You may notice yourself slowing down a little, observing more, feeling more of what you once brushed past. Not because you're searching for answers, but because you're starting to see some emotions no longer fit the way you once understood them. And in that quiet space, something important is taking place. Not loud, not immediately clear, but enough to open a different perspective, a different way of feeling, more honest, closer to who you truly are. You may not know where this is leading, and you don't have to, because sometimes change doesn't begin with action. It begins the moment you can no longer pretend that everything is still the same. And when things no longer follow the old script, a very particular feeling begins to appear, one that many people try to avoid, and yet it carries more meaning than we often realize. It's a kind of confusion, not overwhelming, not chaotic, just a quiet pause in the way you respond, a moment where you're no longer completely sure what the right way forward is. You might notice it within yourself, or in someone else's eyes, a slight hesitation, a smile that doesn't feel entirely natural, a silence that lingers a little longer than usual. Very small things, and yet they hold a layer of emotion that hadn't been seen this clearly before. Most of the time, we try to stay in control. We want to understand what we're feeling. We want to respond in a way that feels reasonable, safe. But in moments like this, that sense of control doesn't feel complete anymore. And somehow, that's exactly what opens the door to something real. Because when you're no longer fully in control of your emotions, you also can't hide them as smoothly as before. There's no perfect mask, no carefully arranged response. What's left is something deeply human, a version of you that is feeling, reacting, present with what's unfolding inside. And if you look closely, those imperfect moments are often the most honest ones. A glance that wasn't hidden in time, a silence that says more than words, a little awkwardness, but unmistakably real. Not everyone finds this easy to accept, because honesty sometimes means letting go of the sense of control, and that can feel uncomfortable. But if you look a little deeper, you may begin to see this confusion is not a sign of weakness. It may be a sign that you're standing very close to a part of your own truth, a part you once understood differently, or perhaps a part you kept at a safe distance. No, and now it's closer. You don't have to understand everything right away. You don't have to make any immediate decisions. Just allow yourself to acknowledge this. This moment, even with its uncertainty, is offering something valuable, an opportunity to see yourself more honestly. Not perfect, not polished, but real. And once you've touched that feeling of confusion, once you begin to sense that something is becoming more real, another feeling may quietly follow. A slight discomfort, a quiet stillness, as if you've just seen something you never really wanted to look at too closely before. That moment can feel a little awkward, not because anything is wrong, but because what's being revealed no longer fits neatly inside what once felt familiar. You might find yourself wondering, should I even be feeling this? Is this going to make things more complicated? Very natural questions, very human. But maybe, if you allow yourself to pause for a moment, without judging, without rushing to label anything right or wrong, you may begin to see that this moment isn't here to judge anyone. It's not here to hurt you. It's more like a soft beam of light, touching a corner that was never fully seen before. And when that light arrives, it doesn't create something new. It simply reveals what has always been there, feelings that may have existed for a long time, quietly, without words. Maybe set aside because it wasn't the right time, because it didn't seem necessary, or simply because you thought you already understood them. But emotions, in their own way, don't disappear just because we stop looking at them. They stay, they wait. And sometimes, all it takes is a very small moment, a presence, a glance, an unexpected instant, for everything to begin shifting. Not loudly, not all at once, but enough for you to feel that something is no longer as still as it used to be. This doesn't mean everything has to change right away. There's no pressure to act, but there is something deeply valuable in allowing yourself to see it without turning away, without rushing to deny it, just quietly acknowledging, so, this feeling is still here. And when you can do that, you begin to create a very different kind of space, a space no longer driven by the need to keep everything stable at all costs, but a space where honesty can begin to emerge. It doesn't have to be perfect, and it doesn't have to be clear right away. It just needs to be real, and maybe, from that very gentle truth, something begins to shift. Not a dramatic turning point, not something immediate or defining, but a subtle movement within you, where you can no longer see things the same way you once did. And sometimes, just changing the way you see is already the beginning of many other changes to come. And after you've moved through each of these layers of feeling, from that first gentle moment, to the reflection, to the subtle shifts within, maybe what matters most right now isn't finding a clear answer. Because not everything needs to be explained right away. Not every emotion needs to be named perfectly the moment it appears. There are things that the more you try to understand too quickly, the further they drift from what you truly feel. You may be used to thinking, analyzing, keeping everything in an order that feels safe. But this time, what's happening inside you may not need a logical reason. It simply asks to be felt. You've seen something, a very small shift, but enough that you can't feel things the same way anymore. A glance, a silence, a feeling that no longer fits neatly inside what was once familiar, and that alone has value. You don't need to rush into deciding what it means. You don't need to act immediately. Just allow yourself to acknowledge this. There is a part of you becoming clearer, and instead of trying to control it, to place it back where it used to belong, maybe all you need to do is stay with that feeling a little longer. Stay, not to analyze, but to listen. To notice how it appears, how it shifts, how it touches those deeper parts of you. Because sometimes, the most meaningful things in life don't come from understanding everything quickly. They come from allowing yourself to feel deeply enough that truth reveals itself in its own time. No rush, no force, just a natural unfolding. And maybe, when you look back, you'll begin to see the very moment that made you feel uncertain was also the moment that opened a different door. A door that leads you closer to your own true emotions. Not to change anything outside right away, but to understand more clearly where you stand within your own journey. And in that journey, there isn't a single right or wrong. There isn't just one path. There is only presence and honesty with what you're feeling. So, if recently you've experienced a moment that shifted things even just a little, maybe you can see it as a quiet invitation. An invitation to pause, to observe, and to reconnect with yourself in a deeper way. You don't have to understand everything all at once. Just begin with this. Don't turn away from what you've already seen.